Hi, everybody. Welcome to NewsNite for Friday, December 2nd. Great to have you along. All eyes for the nation on Akron for all the wrong reasons. We'll have an update on the Craigslist killings. The plot thickens in the race for Summit County Sheriff. Now we know why Gary Moneypenny's name was out there so early. And what to come of Ohio's primaries, one or two? Those stories and more next on NewsNite. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Great to have a panel back and a lot of topics. Let's get right to them. Great to welcome Ed Esposito here this week from WAKR. Always great to see Steve Hoffman here this week from the Akron Beacon Journal. And great to welcome freelance contributor and journalist Jody Miller. As we mentioned, all eyes of the nation on Akron for all the wrong reasons. Pure evil guys with the Craigslist killings. Richard Beasley this morning arraigned now on a charge of murder. So far we've got 3 bodies in 2 counties, a 4th guy who escaped. My sources tell me the big motive in all of this was that Richard Beasley was headed back to prison, and the vice officers tell me he didn't want to go, so they had a plan here to steal some identities and move on. This is shocking. This is like something you'd see on a Lifetime movie somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be fascinating as this unfolds. The other piece of this, besides the motive, which I think all of us have been wondering about, since these people, by definition, were job seekers. They had, they didn't have a lot of money by definition. They wouldn't be looking for a job. Is the relationship? I'm anxious to see how the relationship, how this teenager and this guy. We know how they met, and we know some of their inner relationship. But I mean, what kind of control did this Beasley? How did he?
Are there other kids involved? That's my question to this too. I mean, if he's playing some sort of predatory role and using his alleged ministerial status, or at least preacher status. He's not a minister. He had no organized ties to any church, but was he using that to prey on kids that didn't know any better?
Well, and our colleague Phil Trexler has been following this case since it broke, and I thought it was interesting, the handwritten letter that he has received and that the Beacon has received from Beasley, bemoaning the fact that all he tried to do was to help people, and that he in his ministry he took money he'd received from an auto settlement, I believe, and he would go out and he would save these people from themselves. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this all works out.
I want to hear from the judges, because apparently he did go to court on behalf of some women who'd been picked up on crimes and told the judge, hey, release them to me, I'll help them get back on their feet. And now clearly it doesn't look like any of that was going on. I think a lot of people were fooled by Richard Beasley's demeanor. We're going to learn more about that in the coming days. But when it comes to fighting crime on Akron streets, since we last met you, actually a week ago, Chief James Nice announced that 25 new officers are coming to the department. The union says they need 50 or 100, but how are we able to afford 25 new cops when just a year ago we were laying officers off?
Well, you have attrition, certainly, that plays into a role in that. The other thing you have to look at, I mean, this isn't just an immediate, there's going to be 25 new feet on the street starting January 3rd. It's far more complex than that. They have to go through training, and it's this is a 5 to 6 month period where they have to do that. So when you announce you're going to hire now, these are people that are coming on board maybe in the summer, maybe later in the year. So you have to factor in all the retirements that are involved in that. So you're hiring 25 more cops.
Right, but the nice thing is also they've got a class that is all ready to go. Right. So that's going to save some time in terms of the training and getting them certified and out on the streets. But I think it's great news that the city is going to be able to do it. And of course, Paul Helinski would like more cops than just the 25. But I think in your interview with James Nice last week, I think he was very gratified that the city was going to be able to fund another 25 cops, because it's just going to help fight crime.
This idea that there's some sort of direct proportional relationship between the size of the police force and the crime rate. I mean, this is Helinski's song and dance. And the sad thing for me is, for the average person, it probably makes sense. The counter-argument is that you need to learn how to, as we've been saying for years now, the key to this is to get out in front of these crime trends, to work smarter, to have community policing, so that you're not put in a position where you're responding with massive force to some incident, that you're getting ahead of the curve. And this is something that I think I get the feeling that just, Paul Helinski either doesn't get that, or he doesn't want to get it, because getting it would mean reorganizing the department in ways that would break union rules and these long-standing patterns, all these little units that they have that only do certain things at certain times. I fear that that's part of this. But I hope they push ahead. I'm glad to see 25 new officers. But I think this idea of reorganizing the department also has to go forward.
And it's not just James Nice who wants to do it, but don't forget, he came in after the perf report. And the perf report recommended an awful lot of the progressive moves that I think he, as the new chief, wants to institute. So I think it's going to make a good... Exactly.
So, I mean, it's not as though this isn't the first time it's come on, but I mean, without demonizing Holinsky.
Oh, why not?
Well, you do that so well. But and I'm not going to angelicize Holinsky. But, the fact of the matter is all those work rules and all those things are in the contract were agreed to by two parties, not just one.
I understand that.
So, if you're talking about reorganizing a department, this is a question I've asked Holinsky in the past, is, do all these work rules make sense? And, the response is pretty much they're in the contract. Our job is we have a contract. These are the rules we operate on. This is what cops do. When cops pull you over, they don't say, "Oh, I'll let you." They're not supposed to let you off. They're supposed to say, "This is the law." So the contract are the rules under which they operate. If you want to change those things, bring it up in the bargaining process. But right now to say that you're leaving this impression almost as though the FOP is holding the city hostage. The city agreed to these rules. If you got to change the rules, reorganize them.
I did ask the chief about working with Paul Holinsky, and the chief says they have a good relationship so far. He thinks they are making progress, and they have a good dialogue for some of these changes. But while Akron police officers now getting used to a new leader, the Summit County Sheriff's deputies will be as well in a year. Drew Alexander says that after a decade at the helm, he's going to step out. And that certainly adds some clarity to what we talked about 2 weeks ago with Gary Moneypenny, chief deputy, deciding that even though he's just got elected to council, he wants to be sheriff.
Well, but Gary has always wanted to be sheriff. I think that was one of the reasons that he left city council in the first place and went and started work at the sheriff's office as the deputy chief. Was that his position? I think it was deputy chief. Chief deputy. Okay. And he's obviously Drew's chosen successor. They have a great relationship together. I'm sad to see Drew Alexander say he's not going to run again. He's done an amazing job, I think. He is one of the few public officials that I think I have ever come across who is not so politically oriented that it interferes with his job. This is a man who he's a good cop. He does his job, he likes his job, and it's interesting that he, as a Republican, would endorse Gary Moneypenny, who is a Democrat.
Unless you know the two of them, and then it's not surprising at all.
No, it's not. But what's surprising is information that, Ed, and you can verify this, that came out in Ray Horner's morning show this week. And one of the things that Drew Alexander said was the fact that he was approached by Alex Arshenkoff, the head of the Republican Party, saying, if you're not going to run for re-election, we would like you, as the Republican Party, to step down so that we can name your successor. And that did not sit well with Sheriff Alexander.
Well, I wouldn't say Drew is apolitical or non-political. Right. You don't get re-elected 3 times or elected first and then get elected 2 other times. And he said he was going to run for a 4th term, too, before changing his mind. Drew Alexander is a very good politician. The issue is whether or not he's partisan. I think if you look at his history, he's been decidedly nonpartisan. He's forged relationships based on personal relationships and whether he trusts somebody and the measure of their character, regardless of what initial came after their name. I think the case in here was that there are a lot of county Republicans. Alex is a forceful guy. Alex has a vision for what the Republicans should do, and he's not bashful about asking for it. I think in this one case, he called Drew at a bad time to do that, and he was probably a little too forceful, and Drew's response pretty much was, I'm 71 years old, screw this. I don't need to do this anymore, and I'm not going to.
Well, and I think he also indicated he was upset that Alex would indicate to him that the Republican Party already has somebody picked out who they would put in the office if Drew would step down early.
Why wouldn't you?
No, I know
Of
that,
course
but
you would.
no, but I think Drew's point on Ray's show was the fact that he wasn't.
He wanted a voice.
He did want a voice.
Right.
You know, he cares enough about that office to really care who, in fact, is going to sit in that seat.
This is one of these offices that it just kills me. You know, we have these county-wide administrative offices. You know, the sheriff does make some policy, I guess you could argue, with the jail, but basically it's an administrative position. It's also a position, you know, that most electors in Summit County could never run for in a million years. You have to have certain qualifications to even be a candidate.
And as we talk about the qualifications, let's move the conversation now to newsnight.net.
For more NewsNight content, including extended discussions, full interviews, and the chance to speak your mind about the issues, join us online at newsnight.net.
As we mentioned, the race for Summit County Sheriff, much will be made of the primary. Question is, when will it happen? Guys, we're still looking at maybe one primary, maybe two, March, April, May. An awful lot of seats and an awful lot of people involved, even levies, wondering, do I file, don't I file? Where are we going with this?
An awful lot of money.
The big problem is we're approaching December 7th filing deadline for a March primary. There are many people that wanted to have one primary in March if we could do it. As things stand now, we have a second primary in June scheduled for congressional candidates and presidential candidates in the primary. So there's lots of discussion going on, but no real progress. So it appears to me that we might get to December 7th, and these congressional candidates. Right now we have 18 districts. We're supposed to have 16, but we really don't have 16 because they've been held up in a referendum drive. So the question, I guess, is what happens if we don't have a deal on the districts and we don't have a deal on a primary, which could be shifted. It could be shifted easily from March to April or everybody in June. I'm not sure what happens on the congressional side, and on the presidential candidates have to file slates of electors by congressional district. That's a complication there. So the short answer is nobody really knows. There are some people that think that the Constitution says if there are no districts in place, you can't use the old ones. If there are no new districts, valid districts in place, that everyone will run at large. You'll have 16 members of Congress running at large. Then I'm
Just
also
top 16 get to go.
Bingo. And the problem with that is, I'm told,
My ballot's not long enough.
yeah, really. Anyway,
But who represents what district? And I
You don't
mean,
have-
well, that's just it. You wouldn't have a district. So, I mean, how could somebody who is elected in that kind of a setup in Cuyahoga County know exactly how to represent somebody in Hamilton County?
it would be.
But by the time that decision's made, would it be too late for people to file? In other words, by the time they make that decision that we've gone too long, is it too late then for people to file to run for Congress? There's a lot of dates.
You
here.
can play around with the filing dedeadline.
Okay.
Trust me. I mean, you can alter that. That's a statutory thing. You can fiddle with filing deadlines. The other problem with running at large, I'm told, is that the Voting Rights Act talks about adequately representing minorities in Congress. And obviously, if you have an at-large, and many cities have run into this problem, if you have at-large races, it tends to be much harder for African-American candidates to win. So somebody could file. My guess is that if we did go to the ollie income-free primary, as I like to call it, if somebody would probably file a Voting Rights Act suit.
Well, and there were 3 districts that were specifically addressed that in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland.
Right.
Well, but the interesting thing to me here is everything anymore has become so partisan-driven. It's like compromise, whether it's in Washington or in Columbus, has become a dirty word. And it all goes back to the Republicans putting together a congressional district map, if I'm not mistaken, that takes us from the 18 districts to the 16 districts, but it was so heavily weighted that 12 of those 16 districts were heavily favored for Republicans, and the Democrats objected to this.
This is yet another let's bash the Republicans. The
I'm not bashing the Republicans,
Democrats
Ed.
do
I'm
the
just-
same thing when they're in power.
Exactly.
This is why those races in 2010 matter.
Exactly.
So,
but if you'll let me finish my
All right.
point. The point is that the way the districts are drawn should not be left to the people who can be affected by those. I really think that there's got to be change in the state of Ohio where the districts are decided in a better way.
Normally, I would buy Ed's argument that, you win the right races and you control the legislature, you get to draw the congressional boundaries your way. The problem here is the emergency clause. the Ohio House Republicans do not have quite enough votes to pass a bill, a redistricting bill, which would probably also include a change the primary clause, without some Democratic votes. They can't do that. They need it. That's the problem they're in now. They passed something, but it's not in effect by December 7th. So that means compromise to me. Hey, you know, yeah, you had all the marbles, but you kind of miscalculated, and now you don't have all the marbles, so you're going to have to make a deal. The Democrats have offered a compromise which would give them 6 competitive districts, the Democrats, plus the majority districts. But the districts that the Democrats are calling competitive are still leaning Republican, just not outrageously, by 5 percentage points or less. So there is the beginnings of, I would think, a pretty good deal, I mean, on the table.
But we're still looking at December 7th, Pearl Harbor, as a
day that will live in infamy.
In Ohio.
For Ohio to get its act together. We can't even talk about whether voting is correct because we can't figure out if we're going to vote.
Is it any wonder that anyone watching or paying attention thinks that these people are idiots and that the government is not dysfunctional anymore, it's non-functional, and why bother?
But I understand your point, Jody, that like we saw in 2000 where they literally carved out Tom Sawyer's house to put him into another district, why people would think that there's factors involved in how they make these decisions. But the ripple effect all the way down to the lower level, the Akron schools need to put another levy on the ballot. It's a big change whether it's March or June.
Right.
But they've got to decide whether they're going to pay administrative fees to file by next week.
Exactly.
Not knowing where it's going to be.
Exactly. And it all goes back to Columbus. And from my perspective, the inability to sit down across from each other, lock these people in a room, and until they come out with a solution that's going to work, don't let them out.
And while we mentioned the Akron schools levy, they will go on the ballot again. Some additional ballots that were added into the count, now mandated recount. It got within 200 votes. It looks like they got clobbered by the early voting, which probably spells to they didn't get their message out soon enough. But what's interesting to me is all 10 Akron City wards voted exactly the same as far as up or down as they did 5 years ago when an issue was on the ballot. All 10 of them, those that voted for it and those that voted against it.
Interesting.
What do the schools have to do to get through to those people in some of those districts that just, regardless of the economy, seem to vote the same way on education?
They have to go make their argument door to door. They have to say, okay, where are the wards where we're doing poorly, and do that. I mean, Ward 8's going to vote for it regardless.
And Ellett is going to vote it down regardless.
Right. So
seems to be the way it goes.
So what does that tell you? That tells you you got to find a way to tell the people in Ellett that if this is important to you, this is what you have to pay for it. You have to vote yes. And it is door to. I mean, this is door to door. This is classic local campaigning warfare and strategy. You can't do it with ads in the paper, with all due respect. You can't do it with ads on TV or on the radio, with all due respect. You can't do it with that mass media outreach. You have to do it going and knocking on people's doors and sitting in their living room and explaining this is why you have to vote yes.
Yeah, I think you have 2 problems right now with school levies in a city like Akron. One is the demographics are not working in your favor, and there are certain wards of the city that are older that you do not have households that have school-age children. And so the argument you have to make to them, to go to the second point, is you have to make a property value argument. You have to go into these areas and say, you need a strong school system. Well, these people, their property values have already been hammered. And so that argument is like, they're looking at it like, what? Yeah, so it's a tough, it's a tough sell.
But I love, you made the suggestion when the levy first went down that if one parent of each school child, in the Akron Public Schools voted yes,
it would have passed.
It would have passed. So I think the focus of any campaign has got to be in the schools themselves with the parents of those kids. And if they are not registered voters, you get them out and you make them registered voters and you make sure they understand the importance of this levy for their children. Because the demographics, as Steve has said, have switched. There is a larger senior population in Akron and less people who are voters have children in school, so they don't have really the vested interest they used to have.
Let's talk about the timing of levies, though, as we move the discussion now to NewsNite.net.
On NewsNite.net, we cover a broader range of topics than we can on the air in 27 minutes. Be part of the conversation on our Facebook page and at NewsNite.net.
Much is always made in broadcasts like this about the hikes in tuition across the state. This week, the University of Akron making headlines when it agreed to some pay hikes for employees from the top all the way down to the bottom. A lot of teachers argue, hey, we were overdue a pay hike, but there are people up on Dr. Prenza's staff getting some really nice pay hikes, And there's a lot of students and their families not happy about
Well,
this.
in the first place, faculty get a 4.5% pay hike. Non-union representatives, part-time instructors get a 3% pay hike. It comes at a time when revenues are down because the enrollment didn't quite meet projections, expenses, and all that kind of stuff. But what's unusual is you're seeing all these big hikes. There were two that stood out to me in particular, not saying that they don't do well, but Candace Campbell-Jackson, who is the chief of staff to President Preston, gets a $24,000 or $25,000 pay hike, which is more money than probably a lot of graduates at the University of Akron make on their first job out of school. And also their newly hired vice president for communications, just hired, she's a nice person. Mm-hmm. I've known her, I've known of her for a long time. But, I mean, you're hired into a job at $170,000 a year, and then you might make, in 7 months, $185,000 a year.
Which was already more than her predecessor.
The argument from the argument from Proenza and from the Board of Trustees is that you have to stay competitive to get good people. My argument always is you couldn't find somebody good at 140.
Absolutely.
You couldn't find someone good at 120. I find it hard to believe that some of these positions have to pay that kind of money.
And the other thing is they hire these people in communications and marketing, and then they go through this exercise of as Ed's saying, giving them very generous salaries, raises. And these are marketing people. Does it not dawn on these people that in terms of marketing the university to students and their families, that this might not be a really great idea? What are they paying these people for? Can't they figure that out? I'm stunned. My attitude is, if you're going to give somebody a raise like this in a public institution of higher education, wait. Don't do it now. Make it an informal agreement, do something, but don't do it now. Not in the economy we're in.
Bad taste in parents' mouths?
Exactly. In parents' mouths, in students' mouths. I mean, the costs of getting a college education are rising exponentially. And it's really hard for people to be able to say, well, wait a minute, the costs are rising, but are they rising because you're paying the people who aren't even in the classroom? Are you paying the people who aren't teaching our students the kinds of money that you're willing to pay them? And I'm not saying they aren't worth a lot, but I agree completely with what Steve said. What you do is maybe fashion a kind of thing where when the economy kicks up or student population growth occurs, then maybe you do a kind of a bonus type of a thing. I'm offended by the marketing kinds of salary increases. We're saying these people haven't even been there to do a job. You have no idea if they're the right fit for that job, and they've got this kind of raise.
Have we reached a point, though, where Proenza has had such the Midas touch on that university that whatever he wants, he gets? So if he wants these people to get raises,
well, something,
they get raises?
It would make sense to extend the Midas touch if you weren't down $4 million or so in terms of revenues. And the bottom line, if you were up $10 million, if you were up $6 million, then you can say, well, you know what, it's a lot of money, but the fact of the matter is the university is doing well, and that they've seen an increase on this. I'll tell you, there is a train coming regarding higher education that is really scary. It's coming because of a pending bubble burst on student loans. That's a huge liability nationwide. There are a lot of people holding paper. You're making it to the point where parents feel all this pressure to put their kids into good schools and get a college education. Clearly, a college degree pays benefits over the lifetime. But if you can't afford to go pay $10,000, $12,000, $16,000 a year for school at a place like the University of Akron, do you make those sacrifices? Parents are saying more and more, send them to another school, put them in the military. There's no shame in that. It's an honorable profession. Find some other way to get this done. But this is like reverse class warfare. You're putting a higher education now so incredibly out of reach, and like it or not for these college educators, one of the things that people look at as an expression of why costs are so out of control are salaries like this.
Yeah, I still think, this was true at one point, but I think it probably still is true. You can send your kid to Kentucky, have them establish residency, takes a year, I believe, have them go to a state university in Kentucky and still come out ahead versus a public school. Financially. And the problem that these people are going to get into is Akron U and other schools like it in Ohio have been countercyclical. In other words, when the economy gets bad, they actually benefit. More people want to go to school. They get the flow out of more expensive institutions. We can't afford to send you to Miami, but we can
live at home, and we can afford to send you to Akron.
But there is, and these marketing geniuses that they've hired have got to figure this out. At some point, you reach a tipping point, and that phenomenon is over. And what if they've hit it now? What if enrollments, in fact, does start to go
at an all-time high there at the university? The university,
but it didn't increase this year from last year.
And they've planned. See, this is their lifeblood. They have structured this whole deal, the expansion of campus and all this other stuff, on the assumption of growth. And if they start going, if the line starts heading south, it's not going to be a pretty picture.
And we're inside 2 minutes, and we're talking about the university. So much been made in the last few weeks, especially online, that Jim Tressel might be coming to campus. I'm happy that rumor has been put to bed, but it sure would have been nice.
It would have. It would have been nice to see him in a blue vest.
Yeah, well, they I don't follow their football program, but they
nobody does. That's the problem.
Right, it needs something. It needs something.
I'm not sure it needs Jim Tressel, that's for sure. Even though he's a graduate of the University of Akron, I'm sorry. No, find somebody else.
You wouldn't have embraced that.
No, not at all.
I would take that as a no.
Not at all. This is a man who was fired from Ohio State University because of. All right, he resigned.
Okay.
Before he could be fired for improprieties. And I'm sorry, given the Penn State stuff and everything that's going on, find a coach who can coach kids who's going to do a good job and doesn't have any black marks against him.
I would have hired him in a heartbeat.
Oh, if only we had more time. If only.
Urban Meyer.
Did you see what Urban Meyer is costing Ohio State?
I know, and that's
what
the
is it,
whole
$35
problem
million
with
for a 6-year deal?
college education anymore.
The Zips did end up paying Ionello quite a bit more than J.D. Brookhart made, and it did not work out.
Well, they got 2 wins out of it.
In 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years, yeah.
Those are pretty expensive wins.
That's right.
But they got a great soccer team. Unfortunately, they didn't advance beyond the
And the basketball team will right itself.
Yes.
Forget the West Virginia
Yes.
loss. The basketball
Yes.
team will get back on its keys here.
But shouldn't we be talking about classwork?
And we will in weeks to come. Jody, Steve, Ed, thank you so much. Have a great week, everybody. See you next Friday for Newsnight tonight.